everyone. This is Krista at headquarters along with the RAD team and OGC and the our contractor Dan from the Office of Recapitalization, who works on our resource desk as well as facilitate our training today again. So welcome to the field. Glad you're joining us. It looks like we have 43 people on the line so far, and I'm sure more will be joining as they get settled in for their morning. We had yesterday at the start of or about this time yesterday, we had 108 people join the training, and by the end of the day, after a very long day of a lot of talking and with that break in between, we still had 93 people at the end of the day who were participating in the training. And there's actually more folks than that, because that's just who is registered as opposed to who is sitting in a conference room working together and going through the training. So, all right. Well, again, welcome to day 2. We had a couple of follow-ups for you. And first, I want to start with the appropriations has lifted the cap from 185,000 RAD units to 225. So our timing could not be better in regard to rolling out the field implementation, because we will have more RAD work coming our way. So, of course, we talk in projects and not units, and that's been one of the challenges in working with the Office of Housing on this, because you know, we may look at it, something that is 500 units in one project, and so that's just one to us, but it's out of that 185,000, that's 500 units. So it's a little challenging, but we are breaking it down into actual projects for us, which is why we have some of the information that we placed on the resource desk for you. So that you know the immediacy of that 225 raise, where the cap has been raised. The important thing for us to know is, first, everything that comes in will be under the Civil Rights Notice published in November of last year. That's the good news. The more challenging news for us is the Office of Recapitalization actually had a number of PHAs with the total of 20,000 units that were on a waiting list. So there's already a group of public housing authorities that are ready to get started on their RAD process. As opposed to, we're starting from day 1 of 186. The 186,000 unit, we've actually got another 20,000 right now ready to move forward or start the process, not tomorrow. So again, our timing for the training is really timely because it correlates with the appropriations. A couple of things we wanted to do. We're going to share a screenshot. Are we going to do that now, Sylvia?
I can pull it up.
Okay. We're going to share a screenshot for the benefit of everyone, but particularly the regional directors. There was a question yesterday about the way the regions work in regard to their internal controls about who approves what and at what levels. And so I mentioned that there is a column on the resource desk for the reviewer to upload the document, the final document that will go to the PHA, and also for the reviewer to check the box that says if it is a transaction rejected or if it's an approval, for the reviewer to check that box. However, the information will not be communicated to the PHA until the RD actually certifies that it's ready to go and puts in a date for it to be sent to the PHA, which is electronic, so it's immediate. Right now, what you're looking at on the screen, it says reviewer confirmation. We're changing that title. It is restricted only to the RD, so even if you went in as a reviewer confirmation, only the RD would be able to access that box anyway. But as we work to refine the resource desk types of screens that you're able to see and use, this was one of the refinements that we need to make. But it will say RD or designee certification. So that answers that question from yesterday and also gives you a visual on what that will look like when you go into the reviewer assignment section. Let's see. Okay, I think that's it. and that we can go ahead and get started. And Sylvia Nelson is our first presenter for the morning, so we will let her take it away. Thanks, Sylvia.
Hi, everyone. So Celia went through the first component of the sufficiently comparable opportunities exception yesterday under totality of the circumstances. The next two sections that I'm going to go over are a tad more straightforward, I think. They're more calculations based. So there's not as many slides. We're going to go and focus mostly on the checklist. But hopefully they're a little bit easier to digest, but again, somewhat difficult for a PHA to actually achieve. So just so that you're aware, this is, again, kind of in that same category of a very difficult exception for a PHA to meet at any point in time. So starting with the 50% of PHA units outside of the areas of minority concentration, this is similar to one of the subcomponents of the totality of the circumstances factors. But in this case, HUD will apply a presumption that the sufficiently comparable opportunities exist if at least 50% of the comparable hard units in the PHA's portfolio are outside areas of minority concentration. So similar to Celia's definition yesterday when she went through the site and neighborhood standards, comparable units are considered comparable opportunities if they're the same household type, that means elderly, disabled, family, large family, the same tenure type, so owner versus renter. They require approximately the same total tenant payment towards rent. They serve the same income group, are located in the same housing market area, and are in standard condition. So that first step is going to filter out quite a few of your units depending on the type of project that you're looking at. The next is that the units also have to be in the PHA's portfolio. So the PHA's portfolio will include all public housing units in addition to project-based voucher and project-based rental assistance hard units, including those developed under Hope 6 or Choice neighborhoods. This means that they have to be controlled by the PHA and its instrumentalities or funded through PHA-controlled subsidy. So before we go to the next slide, actually, can we go to the checklist? So we're going to spend some time actually going through, and I'm going to go to it starts on page 39 of your checklist if you want to go to that portion. Okay, so this is the beginning of the checklist. A lot of this is going through the site and neighborhood standards that Celia went through yesterday. And then the next couple sections are going to go to overriding housing need, which Jordan's going to go through later this morning in addition to this afternoon with you. But I'm going to page 39, so I'm scrolling all the way down to subsection B of the sufficiently comparable opportunities. So it begins here. There's the same definitions that you saw on the slide. Here's where you're going to be putting in the number of proposed units at the site in addition to the occupancy of those proposed units. From there, you're going to be able to find the number of comparable hard units in the PHA's portfolio by filtering based on the different qualities in those definitions for comparable opportunities or the PHA and the PHA's portfolio. After that, you're going to complete a set of tables, both for PHA properties that are in areas of minority concentration in Table P, and then units that are outside of areas of minority concentration. So here, obviously, we're looking for the property name, address, number of units, occupancy type, subsidy type, and then confirmation that this information has been verified that it is in an area of minority concentration or is not, for both Table P and Q. After you've verified all this information, we're suggesting that you use a variety of different sources. As Celia mentioned yesterday, this is not a hard and fast rule. We're obviously deferring a little bit to the PHA's provided information. So you can use the PHA's website or other sources that you might be familiar with as a field reviewer to confirm whether these are all the units that are in or outside of areas of minority concentration that are comparable within the PHA's portfolio. After that, you're going to calculate the percentage of comparable hard units in the PHA's portfolio and put that number here. Again, this is a pretty hard and fast rule. Be sure to make sure you include the number of proposed units when you're creating this percentage, so you have to include whatever the units are that are proposed to be occurring through the RAD transaction. So that's actually it on the 50% comparable units. Perhaps, do we want to double check really quick that if we have any questions on that first before we go into the next subcomponent of this?
And just if anyone was not here yesterday, I'll give the instructions on how to ask questions again. You can either type them into the question section, or you can raise your hand, and then we'll unmute your line, and then you'll be able to ask your question. Sometimes those who are only accessing our presentation through their computer, if their microphone is disabled or they don't have one, then we wouldn't be able to take your question. So then we'd ask you to call in to us using the phone number. Do not see any questions, though.
Okay, so then jumping back into the PowerPoint, actually. So the next slide. So the next and last component of the sufficiently comparable opportunities focuses on the number of RAD conversions that will create affordable housing outside areas of minority concentration. So again, we'll apply a presumption that sufficiently comparable opportunities exist if a set of RAD conversions from a single public housing property, individually or in combination of transactions, will result in the creation of many similarly affordable housing units outside areas of minority concentration. I'll go into some of those definitions on the actual checklist, because obviously many is not a very clear term. But then from there, RAD transactions do not need to be necessarily closed to be included, but the PHA must provide evidence to show that similarly affordable units are highly likely to be created. We'll also get into how you work with the readiness transaction manager on the recap resource desk to find that information. So now jumping back into our checklist. So the same set of definitions at the beginning here. For this, you're going to put in the number of RAD units by occupancy type, non-RAD LIHTC units by occupancy type, and other affordable units by subsidy and occupancy type of both those constructed on their original public housing site under subsection A here. And then you're going to include that same information under B for the imposition of new long-term affordable restrictions on the transfer of RAD assistance. After you compare the two above, you will confirm whether there is an equal or greater number of affordable units that will be created outside of areas of minority concentration. So if there are, then you will proceed to the next section. If not, then you'll skip to section 8. Going down into some of the tables here, for the approved RAD transactions outside areas of minority concentration, you're going to need to put information regarding the project name, address, number of units by subsidy type, occupancy type, in addition to who is the owner of the project. So it should be PHA owned or associated with one of its instrumentalities, and then also confirm whether it's a new construction or existing project. The last column indicates whether the RAD transaction has closed, and I'll cover that in just a few minutes on how you can confirm that. So you're going to go through Table R, verify the information is correct for each project. Again, this is not necessarily a hard and fast rule, but you can use the information on the resource desk, actually, to find, especially if the project is either in the beginning stages of its application, it should be if it's using this exception. You should be able to find a great deal of this information on the resource desk if you find the property on there. And then for each of the tables, you're going to need to complete a demographics table for both the census tract here and the housing market area demographics. So our suggestion, we provide links to the demographics tool that Rob Renner went through with you all yesterday, but obviously we defer to your preference. I think that that tool is probably going to be your best bet because it provides both of those stats pretty easily. So you're going to need to provide that information here for each of the properties indicated. After that, you confirm if it is in an area minority concentration or not, based on the earlier definitions that Celia gave for minority concentration for site and neighborhood under RAD. And then if they have not closed their RAD transactions, then you're going to continue down here to Section 7. Section 7 is focusing a lot on interaction with the RAD transaction manager in the Office of Recapitalization. We're currently working out some of the processes, but they will provide all this confirmation to us, is the nice part. Since it's not really a civil rights or fair housing related analysis, it's more focused on their area of expertise, so they will be assisting us with this analysis. So that's why you'll need to get in contact with the RAD transaction manager according to the resource desk. So this includes the PHA has provided evidence of site control. The units are created through new construction, or they had zoning permits for construction of similarly affordable units. They provided feasible and reasonable sources and a uses statement for the transaction. They provided evidence of financing commitments exceeding 90% of necessary resources. If LIHTCs are projected, has there been an allocation? Has the PHA contractually agreed with HUD to create similarly affordable units? And did the project meet all of the factors above? So all of these are not necessarily things we expect you to be able to find or know, but the RAD transaction manager will be able to find that information. So that's who you would defer to on that front. So if you successfully find that there is many units that will be created, then you can select that this exception has been met for the sufficiently comparable opportunity. So that actually covers both of those subcomponents, and I'm not sure if we have any more questions based on that.
Okay, we have a question from Jeffrey. Can you speak to calculating the 50% of units when you are dealing with a very large PHA with thousands of units, like perhaps New York or Boston?
I think there's more to the question. Oh no.
Can you read the rest of this question?
That's the whole question.
Yeah, no, that's a question.
I think for the 50%, you would still have to look at the entire PHA's portfolio. So even when you're dealing with a large housing authority like New York City or Boston, the 50% is 50% of the comparable hard units in the PHA's portfolio. So I mean, you can narrow it down a little so that you'd only be looking at comparable units. So for example, if the project that is being built is a family project, you would only need to look at the other family projects in the PHA's portfolio. Same thing if it's an elderly project, you'd only look at the elderly project in the PHA's portfolio. So that's the only way you could really narrow it down. But otherwise, because this is based on the total number of comparable units in their portfolio, you'd have to look at all of it.
And again, this is an exception that I think is rarely met or even collected, yeah. I think, because it is such a hard standard to meet, I guess, is a way to put it.
Oh, the chart.
Yeah, Jeffrey has a follow-up point. He's referring to, let's see, he's referring to the chart and the many lines that would need to be filled out. His follow-up would be, do we need to look into exceptions that are not raised in the RAD application?
Okay, so there are two separate questions. The first one is asking about whether
in the table. I mean, you would need to provide all the information on the properties that are comparable. So we realize that's probably a long chart. You can probably supplement and create a separate, like take the table into a different document if you prefer to do it that way. We can discuss that process as it comes up with your desk officer too, is I think probably a good option if you have one of those large housing PHAs that are looking to use this exception, would be my suggestion. On the next question.
The next question is whether we need to look at exceptions that are not raised in the RAD application, and the answer is no, because the PHA would need to, what we're doing is reviewing the PHA's analysis of whether the site meets the site neighborhood standards. So if they have not claimed the exception, we do not review it.
I think there's one question.
Yeah. All right, we have a question from Kate. Is this evaluation of comparable opportunities an as-is snapshot, or is there some forward-looking evaluation? For example, do we look at if any subsidized units are expiring and moving out of the portfolio, thus creating a need for more affordable units in perhaps perceived concentrated areas? Another example might be gentrifying areas that are currently concentrated but would benefit from the addition of and preservation of affordable housing to curb displacement of existing residents.
So for this exception, we're looking at the PHA's portfolio as is when calculating the 50%. I think if this project that you're examining is in an area minority concentration and we want to preserve it because the area is gentrifying, I mean, that they would claim the overriding housing need exception, which we're going to cover later on today, which specifically speaks to revitalizing areas, and in that case, the project would meet that exception and would be able to be built.
We have a question from Kimberly. Do you expect the reviewer to find all of the units in the PHA's portfolio, or is it the PHA's obligation to provide the data?
I mean, we do expect the PHA to provide all of the data, but I think our job is to confirm that what they've given us, you know, is an accurate reflection. I mean, when we're looking at the PHA's portfolio, for most PHAs, you'll be able to find this on their website, and so we do encourage reviewers to at least try to see if the PHA has a website and, you know, look at their list of properties and get a sense of whether the list that they've given us is complete. But in general, what we're reviewing here for site neighborhoods is what the PHA has claimed.
We have another question from Jeffrey. Can we use personal knowledge to raise an exception not presented as part of the submittal? Yeah. Oops, halfway.
All right, we're back on the line. Did you want to finish?
Sorry, everyone.
Yeah.
I think we should do that.
Yeah. So where were we actually? Oh, okay, so I think we left off on the question of can you use personal knowledge to raise an exception not presented as part of the submittal. And what we were talking about before is what we're reviewing is what an analysis that the PHA has already done. They're certifying to us that the site meets site neighborhood standards, and we're just reviewing that certification to see if it complies with the regulations. So it's really not up to the FHO reviewer to claim the exception. It would have to be something that the PHA has already claimed and analyzed themselves.
Okay. Kimberly has a follow-up point from our question before, as she says that it's from her experience that the PHA's websites do not always include what is in their portfolio. So what tools are available for reviewers to verify the data presented to us?
So
Map 5 in the AFFHT will have the information that you need. And we looked at that yesterday when we were looking at the publicly supported housing page. Table 8. I'm sorry, Table 8.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, I'll add to what Krista said that you can also extract the in a tabular format, map 5, which would show the PHA's housing stock. It will also show other overlapping PHA housing stock. So, but I believe that Table 8 or the map 5 query tool, the item that I believe Shira discussed yesterday, will give you the owner of the particular development.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, doesn't look like there's any more questions, so.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I guess we'll go into the next section on the overriding housing needs. So I will defer to my colleague Jordan Gethsemane.
Good morning, everybody. Now we're going to go over the overriding housing needs exceptions, and we're going to run through the slides here, and then we'll take a look at the checklist after that, and in between we'll pause for some Q&A. So the overriding housing needs exception is when the site selected is in an area of minority concentration, and the PHA indicates that they meet this exception. And it consists of two paths for allowing construction in an area of minority concentration. The first one is whether the site is part of an integral plan of an overall local strategy to revitalize the area. And the second one is if the area is actually revitalizing. And I would say this isn't a compliance issue, and I point that out because many times the PHA might ask what they can do or what they can show to meet this exception after they submit, but it's not really anything that they can do, because as you'll see when we move on further, we analyze the neighborhood through economic indicators, or we will be analyzing a revitalization plan, and neither of those things the PHA can actually affect after they've submitted. Next slide. And so right here, we've borrowed some language from the RAD notice, and we'll break it down further after we go through the general requirements. So in order to be an integral part of an overall local strategy, the site has to be located in a defined geographic area that is the subject of an official, currently operational, and realistically achievable plan for the improvement or revitalization of the immediate neighborhood. And the plan may include areas beyond the immediate neighborhood also. And the covered project conforms to, and the site is integral to, the goals, strategies, and objectives of the improvement or revitalization plan. Next slide. And if we break down these key requirements further, I can give you some examples of what they look like. So in order to determine whether a plan is official, you can ask some questions like, has the plan been adopted or ratified by municipal, county, or legislative body? And is the project actually located within the area? when we're looking at currently operational, you can ask questions like, what progress has been made on the plan? Keep in mind how long the plan has been enacted for relative to the goals accomplished. When we're going through the checklist, we'll give some hypothetical examples of how long a plan has been accomplished, or how long a plan has been enacted for, and what type of progress we'd like to see. Another consideration is it realistically achievable? Does the plan recommend or have designs for items that are not realistic? Keep in mind budget constraints, zoning requirements, and other things that might be specific to the particular plan you're reviewing. And lastly, it should be a plan to revitalize the immediate neighborhood, because the idea is that the project should be able to be supported economically. So will the strategy revitalize the neighborhood specifically, or is it a citywide plan? Citywide plans might not specifically impact a particular neighborhood. And this goes beyond the physical improvement of just the site. Just having, say, a site be rehabbed doesn't necessarily mean that it will be economically supported by the area. So it should definitely go above and beyond just rehabbing the units. That's fine. The second part is that it has to conform to the overall plan. If the plan makes specific recommendations, does the project follow those? And for example, if a plan calls for mixed income housing, does the project only consist of low-income units that require subsidies? If the plan identifies specific problems, does the project alleviate or contribute to those problems? For example, if the plan identifies large housing projects without corresponding retail and business centers as a problem, does the project add subsidized housing but have no economic anchors for that housing? And the next part is if the project is integral to the plan. In other words, is the project necessary to achieve the goals in the plan? If the project was relocated to an area that was not concentrated, would the plan still accomplish those goals? And we'll pause here for any questions you might have regarding this particular section on revitalizing area. I'm sorry, integral plan.
Okay. We have a question from Zachary Blair. Looks like we might have missed you on the last section. So, Zachary, you're on the line.
Yeah, my question was regarding the second to last slide, the very end where you said if it's part of, can the plan, I'm sorry, I'm trying to go back and look at that slide really quick. Is the project necessary to achieve the goals of the plan? And if the project was relocated to an area that was not concentrated, would the plan still accomplish its goals? So is the thinking that if the project isn't necessary to achieve the goals of the plan, would that work in favor of approving it or disapproving it?
That would work that would work in favor of disapproving it, because basically they're applying for an exception to build in an area of minority concentration. And if they can't show that they need that exception, i.e. that the project is necessary to accomplish their goals, then it's conceivable that they should be able to build elsewhere.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Zachary. Any more questions on this section? Okay.
We can go on to the rest of the slides. So the next possible path for meeting this overriding needs exception is revitalizing area. HUD will consider evidence that the site is located in a revitalizing area experiencing significant investment and is demonstrably improving the economic character of the area. They're not necessarily required to meet both of these criteria, but we should analyze all of them. Oh, I see. I see. So we'll actually go through the checklist before we go into Revitalizing Area, just because I'm seeing here in the agenda that we might have some people tuning in later for that particular section, so we can continue these slides when we get back. Let's switch to page 5 of the checklist. We'll just go through the checklist for overriding housing needs. Yeah. So getting our brains back in the mode for the overall local strategy. A project can be located in an area of minority concentration if the project is necessary to meet overriding housing needs that cannot be met in the housing market area. This exception allows approval of sites that are an integral part of an overall local strategy for the preservation or restoration of the immediate neighborhood, or in a neighborhood experiencing significant private investment that is demonstrably improving the economic character of the area. So those are the two different paths, A and B, revitalizing area and overall local strategy. And so if we dig further into overall local strategy on the next page, did the PHA state that the site is an integral part of an overall local strategy for the preservation or restoration of the immediate neighborhood? And that is basically just whether they're claiming the exception or not, and that'll be up front and center. And if they did, then we have to perform the analysis that follows. So a site will be considered an integral part of an overall local strategy for the preservation or restoration of the immediate neighborhood if the site meets the following criteria as detailed in the RAD notice. And these are the ones we just went over in the slides. The site is located in a defined geographic area that is the subject of an official, currently operational, and realistically achievable plan for the improvement or revitalization of the immediate neighborhood, which may include areas outside the immediate neighborhood. And the project conforms to, and the site is integral to, the goals, strategies, and objectives of the improvement or revitalization plan. To determine if this exception applies, conduct the following analysis. The site is part of an official, currently operational, and realistically achievable plan for the revitalization of the immediate neighborhood. And how we determine if this site is part of an official plan or strategy, we can ask the following questions. Whether the site is part of an improvement plan or revitalization plan, and that will be submitted along with the PHA submission. And even if it isn't, you can ask for further, you can follow up with the PHA and ask for it, or you can search for it on the internet. Because if these plans have been adopted, they should be on the local municipal website. And then we have follow-up information for that. If we determine that there is a plan, we ask that you provide the name and date the plan was made, so we can save that for when we analyze progress of the plan. And then we would also like to ask whether the plan has been enacted or adopted by a municipal body. And if so, we also want to provide the date of that as well. The second item to look at is whether the site is located in a geographic area that a jurisdiction has explicitly designated for improvement or revitalization. And this could be business improvement districts, enterprise zones, promise zones, choice neighborhoods. And you could also, on certain municipal websites, you can also take a look at food deserts, crime, education, and other factors that could give you a better picture of the area. And then you have space underneath that question to designate what exactly types of business improvement districts have been specified in their plan, if any. The next question, number 3 to consider, is if the answers to A and B above are no, did the PHA provide other evidence that the site is part of an overall local strategy for the preservation or restoration of the immediate neighborhood? Then you can provide that answer here if they provided guidance that was not part of a regular analysis, because each city might have a different approach to these plans. The second prong is to identify the geographic area covered by the plan. And so the idea behind this question is the plan targeted citywide, as we spoke about earlier? And if it's targeted citywide, are there specific things that will improve the site's neighborhood? And then you can ask if the site is the site located in the geographic area of the plan. So is the site actually located within the area designated to be improved? And if it isn't, you should describe how close it is to that site, because there's still a possibility that the site could benefit from the plan even if it's not located strictly within its boundaries. And then based on the information in paragraphs A through D, the other questions that we answered, is the site part of an official plan or strategy for the improvement or revitalization? And that's basically your conclusion, and you can summarize why you reached that conclusion. And that way someone else looking at this document can get a very brief summary of why we reached the conclusion we did. And below that we have some examples of sites that are part of official plan or strategy. So for example, the site could be part of a choice neighborhoods plan that has been adopted by the jurisdiction, or the site is in a neighborhood that has been designated as a revitalization area by the city. On the other hand, some examples of sites that are not sufficiently part of an official plan or strategy could be that the site is part of a revitalization plan that was created several years ago, but was never adopted by the jurisdiction, and therefore you wouldn't expect to see any progress made on it. Similarly, if there's a revitalization plan for the city, but it doesn't include any activities in the neighborhood where the site is located, we could reasonably deduce that the site's not going to benefit from the citywide plan. Lastly, we want to determine if the goal of the plan or strategy is the preservation, restoration, or revitalization of the immediate neighborhood. And that's, again, the concern as to whether the immediate neighborhood is benefiting or if it's just more of a general city plan. And as you know, some of these housing developments might not be as enfranchised as other areas, so we want to make sure that these resources are also benefiting the site. So in addition to just physically improving the project site, does the plan or strategy include activities for the improvement of the immediate area? Also, identify the needs addressed by the plan or strategy. For each of the topics below, the activities included in the plan will occur in the immediate area, the dollar amount of the activities, the distance from the site. If the plan does not address one of the topics below, please explain. So for example, you might have a plan that doesn't mention specifics, and you can follow up with the PHA, or you can try and find out on your own. And we'll just go through some examples of the different items that we have to document from the plan. So one item that you could look at is transportation. Make sure that the plan that they're submitting to you is not just simply a transportation plan that focuses only on, for example, building roads, improving bus routes, and that kind of thing. You also want to see activities that are going to improve the economic health of the neighborhood. Some other factors that we look at are crime and safety and public health. If the area is noted in the plan to have a crime problem, does the plan address this? If the area lacks or has too much housing, what is the plan doing to address those problems? And you can list the specific activities addressed in the plan. Then you can also, if the plan provides them, distance from the project site and dollar amount. If you look beyond the table, underneath it, we have a question that asks you to summarize some of the different elements. Based on the activities listed in 2B above, does the plan or strategy include appropriate activities to support the preservation, restoration, or revitalization of the immediate neighborhood? And then you can explain or summarize what these activities amount to in your opinion.
Jordan, why don't you give a couple of examples where folks can find that information, the transportation, crime, public safety, the sources?
This one, we're pulling it from the PHA's revitalization plan. And if you wanted to check on some of these, we actually have indicators from a data table that we're putting together for you that we'll go into later. We have actual statistics that you can just simply pull directly from there. Also, if you want to look at crime and safety, there could be some information on the local municipality's website that you can verify for yourself. Different cities do it differently, so we don't have like a particular one-size-fits-all, but most cities, I would think, have publicly available information about their crime rates, and depending on how in-depth the information they collect is, they can also have education, employment rates, and housing data too. I know we do for some of our local ones. So now we have some examples of activities to support the preservation, restoration, or revitalization of the immediate neighborhood. The plan includes a range of activities to support revitalization, including the construction of new market rate housing, the opening of a new grocery store and shopping center, increased bus service at the site, targeted resources for improvement of the neighborhood schools, and increased street and lighting, and the opening of the police department substation. These are examples of a well-rounded plan that could be expected to bring revitalization to the area. Examples of activities that are insufficient to support preservation, restoration, or revitalization could include a plan that was submitted that was the city's transportation plans we spoke about earlier. It wouldn't include activities besides transportation that are necessarily for revitalization. Or the plan for revitalization is for one of the city as a whole. The plan contains a couple of activities in the immediate neighborhood, that is rehabilitation of the local elementary school and creating a new bike path. While good, these activities wouldn't be part of a larger revitalization effort. They would be more specific projects. Next question we want to look at is to determine whether the plan is currently operational and realistically achievable. And based on the information provided in the plan or other information available to the department, is the plan or strategy as a whole or the elements applicable to the covered project consistent with the jurisdiction's land use or zoning code, development regulations, or another official body of laws or rules? And a specific example we can give is that if the plan is calling for the rezoning of a residential district to residential and commercial, so there are small businesses that could support this housing, has there been any proposal to do this rezoning, and has it been acted upon? If you can see that a plan is proposing to do many different things that are incongruent with the current zoning of the land, we could reasonably assume that this plan is not realistic. And then we have space there for you to explain further your analysis and your reasons for doing so. So an example of a plan or strategy that is consistent with the jurisdiction's land use or zoning code would be that the plan recommends that the neighborhood add commercial or retail development to anchor revitalization. The neighborhood includes zoning for both residential and commercial use, and these could be available on the local municipal websites. An example of a plan or strategy being insufficiently consistent with the jurisdiction's land use would include a plan that identifies the current industrial zoning of the neighborhood as a barrier to revitalization and recommends that the neighborhood be rezoned for a combination of residential and commercial use. However, the jurisdiction plans to maintain the industrial zoning of the neighborhood. So if the plan is inconsistent with the jurisdiction's stated goals, then you can assume that they're not consistent. Activities to support the plan or strategy have been included into the official documents of the jurisdiction. So specifically, are there strategies or activities under the plan incorporated in current public, quasi-public agency or major institutional work plans? That's a little bit of a mouthful, so we'll give you an example. If the revitalization plan recommends increasing public transportation service at the site, the jurisdiction's transportation plan should include these activities to support the recommendation. The idea being that it's one thing for a plan to recommend and support these changes, but they should also be documented in actual plans and plans of action for other institutions that would actually carry them out. We could scroll down to the next page to start viewing the next part of the requirement. We also give you space there, as we do after every question, to explain your conclusion and your analysis briefly. Next question, as we saw from the slides, is the plan or strategy or activities to support the plan or strategy incorporated in the applicable jurisdiction's consolidated plan or other comprehensive development plan? And so these are either from the PHA or from the municipality. They'll have other plans that incorporate the goals of the redevelopment plan, and we can verify that. Some examples of these activities supporting the plan or strategy have been incorporated into the official planning documents of the jurisdiction. For example, the revitalizing plan calls for improving the neighborhood's retail corridor by rehabbing the building facades, repaving the sidewalks, and adding street lighting and trash cans, and these activities have been incorporated into the consolidated plan. The revitalization plan also recommends increasing bus service at the site, and this has been incorporated into the city's transportation plan. Additionally, the revitalization plan indicated that the neighborhood high schools need rehabilitation work and new computer labs. These activities are also included in the school district's capital improvement plan. And so you can see what we're getting at is it's not just a revitalization plan that was submitted to us that contains recommendations, but these recommendations are actually incorporated into other institutions' work plans. Some examples of activities supporting the plan or strategy that have been insufficiently incorporated into other institutional work plans can include the revitalization plan calls for increasing bus service at the site and adding pedestrian bridge that will connect residents to the project and retail services. However, these activities have not been included in the jurisdiction's transportation and infrastructure plans. Or the jurisdiction's consolidated plan identifies several neighborhoods for revitalization, but the neighborhood was not one of them. The consolidation plan does not include any funding to support revitalization activities in this particular neighborhood. So there you can see two stark contrasts between a well-rounded plan that's incorporated into institutional work plans and also a PHA plan that might just be just that, only a plan with no actual ability to follow up from other institutions. Some activities in the plan or strategy have received the necessary financial commitments. Specifically, has the jurisdiction published solicitations or incentives for the development projects in the improvement or revitalization area? And if we scroll down further, we can see examples of this. But first, we'll go through the first part of the question. Has the implementing agency secured financing, such as issuance of bonds or final approval for tax increment financing? Have any of the activities in the plan received funding from other public or private sources? And so with these series of questions, we're basically looking to see whether the proposals in the revitalization plan are actually having some funding behind them. We can provide examples of those too. So if the jurisdiction has supported several activities that are critical to the revitalization of the neighborhood, including issuing bonds for the construction of new community centers and offering tax incentives to attract a grocery store to the neighborhood, or there's a state-funded initiative to revitalize local neighborhoods, the municipality submitted a plan and was selected by the governor for monetary award, and these funds have been publicly assigned to projects included in the plan. The idea is that there can be many different sources of funding for these revitalization plans. Some states like New York have some government, state government funded and awarded state dollars that can go towards local plans. Other states might just have to rely on local municipality money. And so we want to consider all of these different funding sources to see whether the plan is funded. Some activities in the plan that might not be receiving sufficient financial commitments could include when a PHA applied for a Choice Neighborhoods implementation grant, but has not been notified regarding whether it received the grant. It's definitely a good step to see that a PHA has applied for a grant, but until they receive it, we can't necessarily confirm and count that towards actually funding the plan. The PHA identifies the city's infrastructure budget as a source of funding for the infrastructure activities contained in the plan. This budget contains funding for annual maintenance activities in the neighborhood, but does not include any targeted funds for the activities contained in the plan. Again, that's another thing that you can conceivably see happening. If a PHA plan for revitalization might list the source of income as an annual maintenance fund, but that fund doesn't necessarily have earmarks for improvement or revitalization, just the annual budget. The next item we want to consider is construction or rehabilitation activities that have been completed, are in progress, or will imminently occur to support the plan or strategy. Specifically, has a construction firm been retained to break ground on projects that are significant to revitalization? And we provide some space for you to explain what the PHA has indicated. Some examples of the construction or rehabilitation activities being completed, are in progress, or will imminently occur to support the plan include a primary goal of the revitalization plan is improving the retail corridor of the neighborhood. A new retail center has broken ground that will include a supermarket, a bank, and several shops and restaurants, and is a 10-minute walk away from the project. The concern here is that all plans start with proposals to build these things, but I think the ultimate indicator would be when ground is broken on a project. Because funds and development and other issues can arise at any point in time, but once ground has been broken and construction has begun, at that point we are very comfortable in considering that these projects are going to be completed. Examples of construction or rehabilitation activities being insufficiently completed are in progress or will imminently occur to support the plan or strategy. The projects that have started are tangential to economic revitalization, such as the construction of affordable housing projects, repaving streets, upgrading the sewer system, and installing new trash cans. Or the PHA cites recent opening of a supermarket as evidence that the revitalization activities are underway. However, the supermarket is located several miles away from the neighborhood and would not be easily accessible to residents of the project. And so these two examples cover two different concerns. The first one being that the actual projects that are under construction are not just the annual maintenance projects. They should actually be revitalization projects that should bring economic stability and progress to the neighborhood, not just repairs. And the second one is that even if there are certain items that are being constructed, are they close enough to the neighborhood to make a difference? There's no hard and fast rule on this issue. You'd have to consider local items such as transportation and maybe barriers to access. As you know, some public housing agencies or some public housing projects are surrounded by highways. So we could consider that a barrier to access if a supermarket is located on the other side. The next item we want to consider is thinking about a conclusion. So based on the information above, has there been progress to implement the plan of strategy as a whole that indicates the plan is currently operational? And then we give you a chance to explain your conclusion, and we provide some examples. The city adopted a plan 2 years ago, and so far has met all of the timeframes in the plan. Several activities that are significant to the revitalization are underway or have received financial commitment. And on this point, we take into consideration how long the plan has been adopted and also what progress has been made. Typically, these plans will include different recommendations and goals and even timeframes. And so you can use that as a measure to see whether or not there's progress on the plan, to see if it's currently operational. Another example is the city designated the neighborhood as a revitalization area 5 years ago. Since then, it has hired a revitalization coordinator and offered tax incentives for business to locate to the revitalization area. Several new businesses have already opened, and the city is in talks with several other businesses that are interested in locating to the area. Additionally, the city's consolidation plan shows that during the past 5 years, the city has allocated funds for various improvements in the revitalization area, such as new building facades, a new bus stop, new sidewalks and crosswalks, and new street signs and lighting. The current consolidated plan contains additional funding for the neighborhood. And so you can see this is a more robust example of how the plan can incorporate different goals and timeframes within the recommendations, and you can verify those. And then we come to a few examples that are insufficient to show progress on the plan or strategy. The first one, the PHA created a revitalization plan using the Choice Neighborhoods Planning Grant. The PHA applied for Choice Neighborhoods Implementation or C&I grant, but was not selected. There has been no activity on the plan since the PHA learned it did not receive the grant. So obviously, if their whole plan is contingent upon them receiving funds and they don't receive those funds, then that's not sufficient. Another example is if the neighborhood received a Promise Zone designation from HUD, but the jurisdiction has not been able to obtain any federal grants for improvement of the neighborhood. In absence of federal funds, the jurisdiction is unable to undertake any of the activities. So again, it's a similar issue, except they're looking for federal funding and they don't get it, then you can see if the plan has gone dormant or not, or whether they're able to find alternative funding sources. And then based on the information above, has a plan or strategy or activity supporting the plan or strategy been incorporated into the appropriate agency work plans, received the necessary financial commitments, and received any necessary regulatory changes to be considered realistically achievable? And then you can explain your conclusion there. We also have further examples of how you might answer this question. An example of a plan or strategy or activity supporting the plan or strategy being incorporated into the appropriate agency work plans, receiving necessary financial commitments, and receiving any necessary regulatory changes could be, and this could be one example. The project is consistent with the zoning for the neighborhood and activities significant to revitalization that have been incorporated into the appropriate agency work plans, including the city's infrastructure and transportation plans, as well as the consolidated plan. The city has also offered tax incentives for businesses to locate to the neighborhood and has included funding for several activities into the appropriate agency's budgets. So for example, you could have a PHA plan, there's funding behind it, and then they have local residence councils vote on which different proposed projects receive funding. So if the projects that are in the neighborhood of the site receive funding, we can consider this plan to be actively supported by the plan or strategy. An example, and here's an example that wouldn't fit the criteria. The plan calls for local neighborhood to be rezoned from industrial to residential. From industrial and residential to purely residential to accommodate market rate housing. However, there's no evidence that the rezoning has occurred or will imminently occur. Additionally, the revitalization is centered around the conversion of an abandoned warehouse to market rate apartments with retail space. However, there's not been any interest from developers in this project. So again, are these plans, different proposals recommended in the plan actually gaining traction, or are they just remaining proposals? The second prong we look at is whether the site is integral, and I read that to be necessary to the plan or strategy. Determine if the covered project conforms to and the site is integral to the goals, strategies, and objectives of the plan. Is the project included in the plan or strategy, and does the plan or strategy contain activities to support the project? That's just a very basic threshold. Is the actual plan mentioned in the is the project mentioned in the actual plan? And if so, does it receive a reasonable amount of attention, or is it just mentioned in passing? You can explain the details of the plan there. Does the project achieve the goals outlined in the plan or strategy? And we went through examples before of whether the plan might recommend mixed income housing and this is purely subsidized, then it might not. And C, is the project a necessary part of the preservation, restoration, or revitalization of the immediate neighborhood? And this could seem to be a hard requirement to meet. Is the housing project a necessary part of revitalization? That's very dependent on the particulars of the site, the neighborhood, and the plan. Some plans might call for preserving affordable housing in the area. Some plans might say there's an overconcentration, and that's why we've given some area to explain the particulars below. D, based upon the factors above, is the project an integral part of an overall local strategy for the preservation or restoration of the immediate neighborhood? This is giving you a chance to summarize your conclusion, and we'll give you some examples. One that does meet the criteria, the plan identifies the buildings of the project, which will include both affordable and market rate units, as well as retail space. It's critical to achieving the goal of attracting higher income families to the neighborhood. An example that would not meet the plan, or would not be sufficiently conforming to the plan or integral to the plan, would be that the project's not included in the plan at all. I think it would be hard to make the case that a project is integral to the plan if the plan doesn't mention it. Another example might be whether the plan identifies the concentration of affordable housing at the project as a barrier to revitalization of the neighborhood and recommends demolishing the project and replacing it with scattered site units or market rate housing. However, if the proposed site would just simply rebuild all the existing units and it wouldn't add any market rate housing, this wouldn't conform to the plan. And then a spot for the overall analysis and recommendation of the integral plan exception. Based on the data and information described above, has the PHA provided sufficient evidence that the project is an integral part of an overall local strategy for the preservation or restoration of the immediate neighborhood? Summarize the rationale for your recommendations. And that's just basically a place for you to summarize your thoughts, and someone else that's looking at this could get a very at-a-glance indication of what analysis was done above. I think we can take a break here and just see if we have any questions, because we covered a lot of material.
Okay, we have a question from Andrew. If a site is in a promise zone, should we take this as strong evidence that they meet the exception?
Look at it in a holistic view. That is one part of several factors to consider. So if it's in a promise zone, that's a good start, but also is the project meeting these other requirements? Like, is it actually in or benefiting from the PHA plan apart from the promise zone? Are there things going on that would benefit the site economically and preserve it? Or is it just simply a promise zone and not much else? So it has to be a wider view of the situation.
Okay, any more questions on this section? Okay, looks like we're good.
Okay, continue. Should we break now? All right. So we will break for lunch now, and we will meet you back here in an hour. Or,
2
sorry,
p.m.
2 p.m. Eastern. There we go. We finished a little early. All right. Thank you very much. And if you think of any questions in the meantime, we can come back and answer them when we meet you back here. Thank you.